I appreciate the fact that we were there in the beginning. I would love it if people told the story a little bit better. The pecking order of how it all happened. But I'm grateful to be a part of that history. Hey, it's Kelly Shaefer from Atheist. Proud to be here in New York City, talking with my friend. We're gonna fucking discuss some shit and dig into the history of Atheist. My mom and dad split up when I was like 8, 9 years old, and she made friends with a lot of colorful people that turned me on to a lot of Sabbath and Alice Cooper and Deep Purple and shit like that. It was like really old school music. But that was well before I ever started playing guitar or anything. So I feel like that was the roots of my my love of music. And then I got into I don't know, just Rush and Maiden and Priest, and then I got a guitar and tried to sort of emulate that vibe when I was 14 years old, and once I kind of spent a year kind of playing that, I just also sort of combined my love of jazz and complex music with my love of metal, and that's how we ended up with Atheist. Just an experimentation of complexity and brutality. That's what I was looking for. Back in the day, when there was Maiden and Priest in school, in the town that I come from is a beach town, so it wasn't like New York City or Chicago or LA or San Francisco, so there were very few people that were like-minded. And I had the Metallica demo because I was into tape trading, and I was on the ground floor of that whole vibe, which is something I think a lot of modern kids that are into metal don't understand how important that was to the early days of underground metal. So it was an exciting thing. It was like you had pen pals that were into the same kind of music, and they would send you bands from Denmark or Germany or wherever, and Florida was like a hotbed for a lot of talent, and we just happened to be caught up in it, and just started making music, and we all sort of thrived on each other, and tried to make. In the beginning, we were trying to make the heaviest, the shit that would so I don't know, sort of freak people out a little bit, apart from Maiden and Priest and Sabbath and all that, speed too, and that was the common denominator that we all had. Like everything was really fast, a little bit of punk rock, a little bit of fucking metal, and so that's kind of where we started as 16, 17-year-olds, just trying to be abrasive, and then as we got a little older and we learned how to play, we tried to really sort of hone it in on some good musicianship. So. Now when I listen to those demos, I'm like, oh man, we meant well. But we were young, we were trying to learn we literally learned to play our instruments together, and we progressed together. So you can hear that in the early demos of Ravage, into Atheist, into the first and second record. You can hear that progression hugely, and it was just 4 or 5 kids just like trying to create a sound that we were excited about from other bands, Dark Angel, Slayer, early Metallica, So when we come from, like I said, a very different kind of town, it was not a musical. It was a southern rock town. So Sarasota, a lot of Florida has like Allman Brothers, that kind of shit. So we weren't, it wasn't like well embraced. So it was a struggle, and but we did have our friends in Crimson Glory were like in the same town as us. So they were very inspiring as well. they sounded a lot like Queensryche, and they were very professional. And so we learned from them and Nasty Savage. Those two bands were really important for us as examples of, all right, listen, if you're gonna do this on a worldwide level, you gotta do it on this level. And so I kind of tip my hat to those two bands for helping us. It's kind of a dream, when you're a kid, you're like, oh, we signed and we're gonna make a record, and we videotaped. Back then, videotaping was a big deal. It wasn't as easy as it is now. But we were just, as excited as any young band would be to make a record with Scott Burns and at More Sound, which was a really nice studio. We'd made demos at other studios that were, they were okay, but More Sound was like, we're like, wow, this is amazing. And, we just had such a great experience there, and there were a lot of other bands that were there recording at the same time. So it was just this wave of things that were happening. But when you're in it, you don't realize what's happening as much as easy it is to look back on history. Say, oh, back then was this, but, we were just fighting for a place. And there was, a lot of really, really great bands in our town. We're talking about Morbid Angel and Obituary, and even before Obituary was Executioner, and so there's just so many bands, and we were just trying to find our place. But we also were outside the bounds of what was really popular in Tampa death metal in the early days. So on top of being in a challenging kind of music, we also were outside of that, so it was hard. It was just really this, the obvious next step from where we went from, because we were just, again, in the beginning, On They Slay, Beyond, certain songs on Piece of Time were very young, 15, 16-year-old kids. So by the time we got to Unquestionable Presence, we were 20, 21, we sort of recognized, after you make a record, you kind of, you're able to see, what you're doing and how it lands in the world, but I mean, we didn't really think about it. We were just like, well, let's just, continue writing songs. As soon as we got out of the studio for Piece of Time, we went right into rehearsal, literally 3 days after making a record, which usually take a minute to kind of, I don't know, absorb what you just did and take a break, but we just jumped right into it. And The Formative Years was the song we wrote for, the first song we wrote for Unquestionable. And that's when we were like, this is our new template. This is where it's thrashy and it's kind of death metal, but it's also complex, and the lyrics are were really important for me to be different from that blood and guts and gore and all the early days of death metal, where I think a lot of people didn't concentrate on the music as much as they did the lyrics, and the lyrics were very shocking, and we weren't really, in that, I, wrote all the lyrics, so I was just like, I don't, I'm not into horror movies, I'm not into all that shit, but I'm into astral projection and fucking aliens, and so I'll write about that, and I try to write it as interesting as possible. And I think that, that's where we went with Unquestionable, and it was such a, we didn't think about it, we were just in it, and it's fun to look back on it, because I can remember those times really, really well, and it was honest. So when we got to the end of Unquestionable, we toured. Steve Flynn, our original drummer, was like, he's a really smart guy, and he was like, I gotta go, I'm going to college. I'm gonna go to college. And I was like, and he was my best friend. We'd known each other since junior high, and so it was devastating for me. I was like, because he was my songwriting partner in fucking Crime, and we'd already lost Roger, and it was like, and at that point he just all the wind had gone out of his sails to move forward, and I was still very much excited about it. So I, we did that, and I was like, well, if you're gonna leave, then I'm gonna try to do some other music. So I started my band Neurotica. And then I was in the studio in Gainesville for about a year and writing songs in this whole other vibe. And then we got a call and said, you know, you're supposed to have another Atheist album. I was like, ah. So I loved the way it came together, but at the time it was terrifying because I didn't have anybody. I didn't have all the old guys. And it was like, oh shit, what are we gonna do? But I've always been a guy that, like, when I see people playing a band, I see somebody that's really, really good, I kind of log it in my memory. And so Frank Emmy was a guy that I saw playing in a band, and so I called him. Once I got that call, I was like, well, so I said, I know you don't know me very well, but we're gonna make a record, and we have to have it by, I think we were in early March, and we needed a record by the end of April, something like that. He was like, okay. So I came back from the Neurotica thing. We got a warehouse, like a rehearsal space, and I worked with a drummer and a bass player that I had known, that I'd grown up with, but weren't necessarily on the level that I needed them to be on. So we got like 2 weeks into that, and we were like, oh. So I called Tony Choi, and I was like, let's go. And then we got Josh Greenbaum. I had met when I was doing the Neurotica stuff in Gainesville. He was living there with River Phoenix and Joaquin Phoenix. So we were friends. It was a weird thing, you know, it was because River was a musician, and Joaquin was like a young, you know, I don't know, it was well before his acting career, you know, I mean, he's now the Joker, and, you know, he's all these amazing things, but back then he was just this kid that loved hip hop, and we rented a house there for 2 months in Gainesville. And River knew the people at the studio that we were recording at, so he would show up every day with like fruit and veggie trays, and so we became friends and did mushrooms together and did a bunch. So that whole Elements experience was like this, you know, not only was it a very short time, but there was a lot of elements in the making of it. So you know, I mean, I don't have to pretend like it's, you know, it wasn't really that way, but it was super fucking weird, and I think that's why that record is that weird. You know, we didn't have a lot of time to scrutinize the music, you know, and typically when you write a record, you write it, you record it, you listen to it, you go, you know, and everybody wrinkles their brow and you try to fix it, but we didn't have any of that time. So the fact that record still matters today is, you know, kind of a testament to how I feel about my philosophy about music is, you know, polishing turds is not for great music, you know. You should spontaneously combust musically. And the more you do that, the better the music will be, I think. And I think, you know, in this modern era of music, I think a lot of that gets lost because you have this Pro Tools world of, all right, I'm gonna piece this all together. I'm gonna, you know, but back then, I mean, all the Atheist records are all live drum tracks. So anybody that plays music understands that, you know, we had to play those songs maybe 7 to 10 times a piece till we got the drum track that we loved. Then everybody went back and tracked to that drum. But it was not to a click track at all. And everything today is to a grid. So I think that's why, you know, people are kind of leaning back to the older kind of music and going, why is that, you know, making me feel differently? And I can tell you why, because it's breathing, it's real, it's not, you know, to a fucking grid, and I think that matters, you know. So if anything, Atheist is that band you can count on as a living organism. All those songs you're listening to are speeding up and slowing down, and it's everything that, you know, the rules of music are against. You're not supposed to do that, you know. Everything is supposed to be, you know, and it's not. And every single time we play Mother Man live or Piece of Time live, it's different every single time. And I think, for me, that's, you know, I don't think Pink Floyd ever played the same way twice. I don't think, you know, Yes or Zap, I don't think they ever played those songs exactly the same way twice. And it should be that way. You should feel as a music listener like, you know, it's like an art form. Like if somebody's painting something live in front of an audience, it's only gonna be that way that night. The next night, it's gonna be a little bit different. And that's exciting. I wish more music was like that, where it's just, you know, a spontaneous pursuit of a song structure. It's not perfect, but every night it's this, you know, and everybody and I don't know, it's a more personal experience, I think. You know, so. Tony Choi is just a aside from being a talented, he played with Cynic, you know, when they were kids, the early days of Cynic and love of jazz and everything. But when we came in to do that record, he had this Latin vibe always. You know, as a Cuban kid, came from Cuba, moved to Miami. So we didn't have a lot of time to sort of scrutinize the direction anything was going to go. We were just writing. I was writing a lot of metal riffs, and he was working with Josh Greenbaum, who was playing, like I said, with River Phoenix, who was just a jazz kid, not a metal kid at all. No double bass, none of that. So it was that whole record. There's only one, maybe 10-second moment of double bass, and once I already knew him before I had asked him to come play with us. And I immediately thought, man, it'd be cool to make a really heavy, because everybody was like, everybody was like super fast. So I was like, what if we make a really heavy record with no double bass? And so that was kind of the pursuit. And, you know, inadvertently, that's how it happened. And, you know, the first 5 years of that coming out, a lot of people were like, you know, there's a lot of shitty reviews, man. I mean, Kerrang was like very disrespectful and said, you know, we were so technical, we were up our own ass, and you know. But I mean, if you ever read old Zeppelin reviews, Led Zeppelin, like Rolling Stone wrote the worst Led Zeppelin, you know. So sometimes, you know, pen pushers don't know what the fuck they're talking about, you know. So. The concept of that was weird, man, and I owe a little bit of that to Rand Berkey. We were driving up to the studio, and I was like, I've always written music first and then the lyrics later. So we didn't have a lot of that time, so I was like, you know, kind of write, you know, sort of some different stuff, and he was like, yeah, what if we just wrote it about all the elements? And I was like, yeah, that might be interesting, you know. So all the music was written, but I mean, when you have predisposed song titles like Mineral, Air, Earth, you know, when you sit down as a lyricist, we're forced to fit into that grid. In the beginning, I was like a little scared about it. I was just like, oh man, I don't want to have to fit into it. But once I did, you know, I was just like, yeah, this is super different. You know, writing from the perspective of the planet Earth, writing from the perspective of the air, you know, and its purpose in life and in our everyday life. So I got excited about that, and it's just I mean, I wrote all those lyrics in maybe 11 days because I had to wait for the music to be done. So I think that, you know, again, I'm a huge believer in the fact that when you're pushed into a corner, anybody in life, you know, adversity is your friend creatively. I think, you know, you should use adversity to your advantage and say, all right, I'm going to fucking, you know, if I only have 5 minutes to do this, it's going to be the best 5 minutes you're ever going to hear. And so I've always been that guy that I always try to kind of pursue that. And so that's how Elements happen. We reissued all the records through Relapse in the beginning, and people were like, well, you know, you're gonna do a new record, and we were like, no, I don't know, you know, it's been 17 years, like, we don't, you know, that music's kind of untouchable, like, you know, so it would suck to come and make a new record that would discredit all that. Until we got in a room together and we wrote the song Second to Sun, and we were like, oh man, you know, you recognize the chemistry that you have with somebody. And me and Steve have been friends for so long, and we speak a different language together musically, and it was exciting, man. We wrote that first song and I was like, yeah, let's do this. I'm proud of Jupiter. There's a lot of really great shit on there, but I understand where people were like, well, you know, it's a modern production, it doesn't sound like 1991, and, you know, what are you gonna do? You know, it's like records are made differently now than they were then, and so by default, your record's gonna sound different. So, you know, I have a lot of feelings about that, but it's proud of the record. There's a lot of really, really great riffs, and I think that much like a lot of our records, it took 10 years for everybody to go, all right, I get it now. So I'm getting a lot more mail in the last 5 years of people going, you know, I just went back and revisited Jupiter, and there's a lot of really good shit on there. I'm like, yes. You know, I mean, there is. Like, we wanted it to be a guitar-heavy record, not a bass-heavy record. That was really intentional. And I think that's one of the main things that people were like, you know, well, you know, the bass is so important. It should be, you know, the focus. You know, it's like not the focus if you don't want it to be. I love a guitar-heavy record. I love Metallica, I love Slayer, I love Merciful Fate. Those are all really guitar-driven records. And I really wanted to make that kind of a record, beyond the bass and the drums. But the drums are so strong. Steve played so strong on the record. But, you know, the bass was not a focal point, so everybody had something to say about it. But I'm proud of that record. This new lineup, like really, really talented guys in the band right now. So I feel like a painter that somebody just gave all these new colors to, you know, and you know, if I was painting in yellows and grays and blacks, now I got all these other fucking colors, and so I just, you know, the songs that we've written together are so exciting. So we're hoping to get out of our contractual bullshit that we're in by the end of the year and get a new record out for the next year. And we got almost 7 new songs that are exciting. You know, they're fucking different. And, you know, every Atheist record is different, but there's a common denominator of experimentation and influence, outside influence, you know, be it jazz or extreme metal or whatever it is. And, you know, you hear a little bit of that. I made a record with a new band called Till the Dirt during COVID. I was stuck at home, and I had a little studio set up, and so I wrote all these songs by myself without anybody else. And so you'll hear my atheist isms on that record, and that was inspiring though. It just allowed me to know that my well is not empty. You know, I mean, I've got a lot of things to say musically, and so what I get with all these incredibly talented guys that are in my band now, I'm just excited about just getting it done. So it'll happen. It'll be sweet, I promise.